Hawaii is a tropical paradise, a land blessed with spectacular beauty and the spirit of aloha. Dana Ireland was smart, fit, and full of life. She loved the big island of Hawaii. On Christmas Eve, 1991, Dana's life was stolen. She was deliberately run over while riding her bicycle, sexually assaulted, dumped into the bushes, and left to die. A local man confessed to the murder and said 2 brothers helped him. The man recanted his confession, but no one believed him.
It's like the story of the boy who cried wolf. Once you start to tell the truth, nobody gonna listen.
Crime scene DNA did not match any of the 3 men, but all 3 were convicted anyway. It raises questions. Are the 3 convicted men innocent scapegoats? Why aren't the police pursuing the man who left his male DNA on Dana Ireland? Why was exonerating new DNA evidence locked up by court order and not given to the convicted men? In episode 12, we'll look at why wrongful convictions happen. Hawaii County is rural and way out west. But we'll see that wrongful convictions can happen anywhere, anytime. For example, we'll see the 1989 attack of a Central Park jogger in sophisticated and urban New York City led to 5 wrongful convictions. North America is not a stranger to wrongful convictions. In the years 1692 and 1693, in and around Salem Village, Massachusetts Bay Colony, over 150 women and men were charged with being witches. Many were found guilty, and of those, 20 were executed, 15 women and 5 men. 19 of the executions were by hanging. The Salem witch trials are often cited as an example of mass hysteria. Well, yes, but to us they are also a prime case in point of a justice system gone terribly wrong. These were all wrongful convictions. Judges for Justice submits that we, as human beings, are still susceptible to the same fears and shortcomings that afflicted our forebears over 300 years ago. Those fears and shortcomings are tragically manifested in the wrongful convictions of today. The University of Michigan Law School, Michigan State University College of Law, and the University of California at Irvine Newkirk Center for Science and Society maintain a website, National Registry of Exonerations. In May 2020, the registry reported that there have been 2,611 exonerations for serious felonies in the United States since 1989. 124 of these exonerees had been sentenced to death. Why do these wrongful convictions happen? That is the question we hope to answer in this episode. If we can correctly identify the causes of wrongful convictions, then maybe we can prevent them from happening in the future and/or help rectify those of the past. If you look at the contributing factors to wrongful convictions, most, if not all, involve human error, and sometimes just plain unethical or illegal conduct. What drives this misconduct? Are these bad people? Or is there something else going on? In the United States, airplane crashes are unacceptable. Using experts, the National Transportation Safety Board thoroughly investigates each incident. The purpose of the investigation is to correctly identify the cause or causes of a crash. Once the causes are identified, changes to systems, equipment, and training are recommended. The goal is to prevent future accidents. Wrongful convictions are the plane crashes of the criminal justice system. The consequences are devastating. However, the United States has never investigated wrongful convictions, but Canada has. There are 3,143 counties or county equivalents in the United States, each with their own elected prosecutor. When a county prosecutor in the United States has a wrongful conviction on his or her hands, one of the last things they are concerned with is how to prevent a wrongful conviction in the future. In Canada, there is one federal system for the prosecution of crime. In the 1990s, 3 egregious wrongful convictions came to light in Canada. They saw great harm to the innocent person and his family, but they also saw great injury to the government. An exposed wrongful conviction comes with a resultant societal loss of confidence in the police and prosecutors. Canada's Department of Justice saw these damages as unacceptable. They decided to investigate them, determine the causes, and make recommendations on how to prevent them in the future. In 2004, Canada's Crown prosecutors issued their report. It was entitled, Report on the Prevention of Miscarriages of Justice. It is a landmark study and a must-read for any person interested in wrongful convictions and how to prevent them. Much of Canada's report centered on how to prevent future wrongful convictions, but they did address a leading cause of wrongful convictions. That cause is called tunnel vision, and we are informed that tunnel vision has a perverse byproduct, noble cause corruption. We all know that animals have instincts, an inborn pattern of activity. Birds make nests, salmon swim upstream to spawn. Human beings also have instincts. Human instincts include sex, security, and social. They are powerful, subconscious drivers of human activity. If our ancestors running around 5,000 years ago didn't have these 3 instincts and passed them on to their progeny, we wouldn't be here today. It seems much of commercial advertising often features attractive men and women models. It is aimed at our sex instinct. Human beings also have a security instinct. They want a roof over their heads, food on the table, the heat on the inside, cold on the outside, and they want to be safe. We also have a social instinct. We work together in communities for the common good, not unlike ants in an anthill or bees in a beehive. Our instincts drive us. They drive our survival as a species. When an instinct is threatened, it generates fear. Edmund Burke said, "No passion so effectually robs the mind of all its powers of acting and reasoning as fear." The September 11, 2001 attack on the Twin Towers in New York was a shocking crime. 2,977 innocent victims were murdered. Our security instinct was threatened. Our social instinct was threatened. It generated fear in the United States. 18 months later, in March 2003, the United States invaded Iraq. Even though United Nations inspectors told us Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction, even though Iraq had no connection with the 9/11 attacks. When two men get into a fight in a bar and one kills the other one, we don't like it, but we understand it. We say to ourselves, I don't hang out in bars and I don't get in fights. It doesn't affect me. The larger community is not threatened. But when a young woman is brutally attacked, then, as she lies dying, she is sexually assaulted, that is another matter. We don't understand this type of crime. It is so deviant to be outside normal comprehension. The appalling crime is a threat to the security and social instincts of the community. It creates in each of us a feeling of fear and a collective fear in the community. A shocking crime leads to fear in the community. The police experience fear too. They have never seen such a deviant crime. Who could possibly have done this? The police fear is compounded when the media publicizes the crime and reports there is no progress in finding the perpetrator. The fear leads to pressure for results on police and prosecutors. The pressure for results makes law enforcement particularly vulnerable to what is called tunnel vision. Tunnel vision is not a simple concept. It is a subconscious force, much like an instinct, a force that drives our behaviors. Tunnel vision is also called confirmation bias. In June 2019, I lectured in Seattle. Here is a segment where I explain tunnel vision and confirmation bias. At this point in the program, I have explained how pressure to solve a crime makes police particularly susceptible to tunnel vision. So the pressure for results leads to tunnel vision. Now, hang with me here. This is kind of an important part. Tunnel vision is also called confirmation bias, and we all suffer from it, or it helps us all, whatever. And it's not a simple concept. When a human being has a problem, and then they come to an answer, a solution, they form a subconscious, the key here is it's subconscious, we don't even know it's happening. Bias, they form a subconscious bias for their answer. They see evidence, no matter how remote or sketchy, that confirms their bias, confirmation bias. They reject evidence, no matter how probative, that is inconsistent with their bias. An example, think about the car you're driving. At one point in time, you had a transportation problem, and that car became your solution. Ever since you have bought that car, you see your car, make, model, and color everywhere you drive. It's a subconscious thing. We don't even realize we're doing it till it gets pointed out. Now, if you take the underlying problem and make it a horrific crime that is gut-wrenching, the confirmation bias becomes, tunnel vision becomes absolutely blinding to the police, the public, to eventually to the jurors. The Canada Report on the Prevention of Miscarriages of Justice informs that tunnel vision has a perverse byproduct, that being noble cause corruption. I explained noble cause corruption in a June 2019 presentation in Seattle. Tunnel vision confirmation bias has what the Canada report calls a perverse byproduct. Perverse byproduct, that's not good. So they call this perverse byproduct noble cause corruption. Police and prosecutors are on a noble cause. Get this deviant killer locked up and make our community safe. This corruption, the corruption can best be described, it's not bribery, it's an attitude of the end justifies the means. It's an attitude of we know this SOB is guilty, we're going to do whatever we have to do to get him locked up. How do you get a conviction with little or no credible evidence? You use what Judges for Justice calls the power tools of noble cause corruption. A coerced or otherwise false confession often starts the process. Inflammatory pretrial media may convict the defendant long before he or she gets to trial. Dubious witnesses, such as jailhouse snitches, are sometimes used. Prosecutors turn a blind eye to forensics and science, such as no DNA match to the defendant. And behind the scenes, official misconduct may take place. A shocking crime generates community fear. The fear leads to pressure on the police for results. The pressure renders law enforcement susceptible to tunnel vision and its perverse byproduct of noble cause corruption. Noble cause corruption manifests itself in many ways. Some of the power tools of noble cause corruption include inflammatory media, unreliable witnesses, coerced confessions, ignoring forensic science, and official misconduct. Please be aware that not every wrongful conviction involves all the power tools, but one or more is present in most cases. Let's look at some wrongful conviction cases that followed this progression. One is the well-known wrongful convictions of the Central Park Five in the most urbanized and sophisticated city in the United States. The other is not so well known, the wrongful conviction of Christopher Tapp in Idaho, a case that Judges for Justice was actively involved in. About 11 a.m. on Thursday, June 13th, 1996, two co-workers found 18-year-old Angie Dodge dead in her apartment in Idaho Falls, Idaho. While she lay sleeping, Angie was stabbed 14 times in the neck and chest. Then the killer partially disrobed her and sexually assaulted her while she lay dying. It was a shocking crime that paralyzed the eastern Idaho community. The crime went unsolved for months. The pressure on law enforcement to solve the crime mounted. The CBS television show 48 Hours has done a great job of covering this case. Here's a short segment from 48 Hours, speaking as a local reporter in 1996, then a police detective and the police chief in 2017.
19-year-old Andy Dodge was murdered last week, the latest violent crime in Idaho Falls.
At least one of the weapons used in it was a knife.
As the officers arrived at the crime scene and found Angie Dodge laying on the ground, and it was obvious that there was a very brutal murder that had happened. A lot of blood.
It's sad to see an 18-year-old girl and see her life taken at the hands of somebody else in this fashion.
7 months after Angie Dodge was murdered, a local man by the name of Christopher Tapp confessed to stabbing the victim.
You hold her down, okay, while she's being cut. You hold her down while she's being cut.
Even though Chris Tapp doesn't match the male DNA at the crime, 16 months later, Chris Tapp is found guilty of rape and murder. Anne Marie Green of CBS News narrates.
The defense argued Tapp's DNA didn't match the killer's, but on May 28, 1998, it took the jury only 13 hours to reach a verdict.
Guilty.
All 5 of the power tools of noble cause corruption were used to obtain the conviction of Chris Tapp. In August 2017, I explained the Chris Tapp case to the King County Council Law and Justice Committee. First, we identified the confirmation bias, the tunnel vision that blinded the police. So we investigated the Chris Tapp case. We identified it, the confirmation bias, the tunnel vision, the blinding tunnel vision was Ben Hobbs killed Angie Dodge. There's no doubt about it, and we're going to build a case against Ben Hobbs. I gave an overview of the power tools of noble cause corruption. We also saw the power tools of noble cause corruption present. Inflammatory media. By the time Tapp got to trial, he was already convicted. Dubious witnesses surfaced at trial. At trial, a woman by the name of Destiny Osborne said that she overheard at a party Tapp confessing to the murder. Now, today, over 20 years later, she says she was coerced by the police into testifying against Tapp. The DNA tests that didn't match either Tapp or Hobbs were ignored. The prosecution failed to produce key evidence prior to trial to Tapp's trial attorneys. We saw Tapp's confession violated the corpus delicti rule. There's no corroboration. Logic told us he didn't know the details because he wasn't there. FBI profiling told us that the killer lived in the neighborhood. He was a peeping Tom. Over a 3.5 week period in January 1997, there were 9 interrogations of Chris Tapp. After looking at Tapp's 9 interrogations, and we saw that he told 6 separate and distinct stories over a 3.5 week period. His first story was, I don't know anything, and his last one was, I stabbed her because they threatened to kill me unless I participated in the crime. So he made 5 changes. Why did he? We couldn't figure out why he kept changing his story. Eventually, we saw that prior to each change of story, Tapp was given a polygraph examination. It was in the polygraph sessions where the police coerced Tapp into changing his story. And then we saw, prior to each interrogation where he changed his story, he was given a polygraph examination, an examination that his attorneys did not sit in on or observe. Our polygraph expert, Dr. Charles Hauntz, said that the polygraph was used as a psychological rubber hose to beat and coerce Tapp into confessing. The police learned they could manipulate Tapp's testimony by threats, lies, and using the polygraph as a ruse. The Supreme Court has ruled you can lie to a suspect, but the court has never ruled you can lie to a suspect during a polygraph examination. The United States Supreme Court has long held that police cannot threaten suspects. Why? Because threats can lead to a false confession. People will lie to avoid negative consequences. In this 48-hour segment, we talk about some of the threats to Chris Tapp during the polygraphs. The United States Supreme Court has held that it's improper to threaten. You can't threaten because it leads to false confessions. They threaten him with the gas chamber, being accessory to murder, and being a conspirator to murder.
Accessory to murder,
They figured no one's going to look at the polygraphs, so it'll be hidden, no one will ever see it. In the next segment, we see the police convincing Tapp that the polygraph is saying he was at the crime with Ben and saw Angie being murdered. When Tapp complains that he doesn't remember, the police officer tells him that sometimes your subconscious mind can block out your memories. He then tells Chris that the charts are telling me, Chris, you are telling me, you were there. I'm going to show you a couple segments from the January 15, 1997 polygraph of Chris Tapp. In this first one, very short, the police officer is telling Tapp that the polygraph is saying he's at the crime with Ben, and Ben goes wacko and starts killing Angie Dodge.
You're in this part, you see him go wacko here. You start basically killing her. You go whack down and say, whoa, whoa, whoa. You left. I don't know if you came back or not. I think you left the room that time. Just didn't know how to handle it.
10 seconds later, a very emotional Tapp, his voice cracking, asks why he can't remember being at the crime.
Don't not remember it. Doesn't remember. I would remember that. Anyone would.
And then the police officer responds to his question by saying, sometimes your subconscious can block it out.
Sometimes you're subconscious.
That, by the way, is an absurd statement. We remember things that were traumatic. We don't remember things that were untraumatic. Most of us remember where we were when we heard that the 9/11 attacks on New York City. We remember traumatic events. And after he says that, he sums up the polygraph examination by saying, the charts are telling me, Chris, you're telling me, it's saying to me, you were there.
On the chart you're telling me, it's saying to me, you were there.
2 days later, Chris Tapp confesses to going to the scene of the crime with Ben Hobbs. In a 3.5-week period, Chris Tapp was interrogated 9 times and given 7 polygraphs. He was told the machine never lies. He was told that he can't remember the crime because his subconscious mind is blocking out his memory of the traumatic event. When he denied stabbing Angie, he was told that the polygraph, which knows the truth, says he's being deceptive. Chris Tapp eventually comes to believe that the polygraph is an all-knowing scientific instrument that can read his subconscious and is telling the machine that he was at the crime. Throughout this case, the police were blinded by their tunnel vision. They believed to their core that Ben Hobbs killed Angie Dodge. Using the polygraph sessions, they manipulated Chris into saying he was at the crime and saw Ben Hobbs attack Angie. But when the lab results came back and the semen DNA did not match Ben Hobbs, they turned on Chris Tapp. They coerced, manipulated, and brainwashed Chris Tapp into saying that he had stabbed Angie. Here is where Chris gives in to their coercion and says he stabbed Angie. Chris finally says, yes, I stabbed her because Ben threatened me. And then Chris said,
Did I do it?
the police officer walks over and says, give me your hand, like he passed the polygraph. And that gets Chris Tapp 30 years to life, charged with the death penalty. Ugly stuff. The polygraph videos eventually came to light. They were the key that unlocked Chris Tapp's prison door. Those polygraph videos, now new evidence, they're the wedge to get Chris in front of a judge to see the coercion that went on.
Oh, don't make him any tighter.
The polygraphs are the answer to getting him out. In March 2017, Chris Tapp was released from prison. He had spent 20 years and 52 days locked up for a crime he had nothing to do with. On March 22nd, 2017, it all came together for Chris Tapp. It was truly a team effort that got him out of prison. A bucket brigade of innocence for Chris Tapp. The judge released Chris Tapp. This is a picture of Chris Tapp, myself, and our Judges for Justice videographer, Faraz Zargami, on the steps of the Bonneville County Courthouse in Idaho Falls, Idaho. In March 2017, Chris Tapp had been released from prison with a murder conviction. But 2 years later, here, let Anne-Marie Green of CBS 48 Hours explain what happened.
2 months after Dripps was arrested, Tapp was back in court.
There's clear and convincing evidence the defendant was convicted of a crime for which he did not commit.
This time to be fully exonerated.
"20 years earlier, in November 1998, Carol Dodge asked the judge to sentence Chris Tapp to death. In July 2019, she had become his strongest supporter and the primary reason he was free and exonerated. If the viewer gets a chance, watch the 1-hour CBS 48 Hours show, The Twisted Case of Angie Dodge. It will show you how it all happened. An amazing story of the courage and heroism of Carol Dodge. The Idaho wrongful conviction of Chris Tapp and the Big Island wrongful convictions of Frank Pauline and the Schweitzer brothers happened in the western United States in counties of less than 150,000 people. One could argue that a wrongful conviction couldn't happen in sophisticated New York City with a skilled police force seasoned in violent crime investigation. But they would be wrong. They underestimate the power of a shocking crime, the fear it generates, and the pressure on law enforcement that makes them susceptible to tunnel vision and its perverse byproduct of noble cause corruption. In 2012, Ken Burns produced a documentary covering 5 wrongful convictions in New York City entitled The Central Park 5. Anyone interested in wrongful convictions should view this excellent presentation. For educational purposes, we have borrowed selected segments from the Ken Burns production. Here is the first minute of the trailer for the Central Park 5. It talks about a shocking crime, the fear it generated, and the pressure on police to solve the case quickly.
New York in the late 1980s was a completely schizophrenic, divided city.
New York's now the capital of racial violence.
If I had more bullets, I would have shot them all again and again.
Criminality, gang wars, drug wars. We were supposed to be afraid. It would have been irrational not to be afraid.
Off with the camera, man!
Last night, a woman jogger was found unconscious and partially clothed in Central Park. She was beaten and sexually assaulted.
A woman jogging in Central Park. Central Park was holy. It was the crime of the century.
5 youths were arrested at 96th Street, all between 14 and 15 years of age.
They got him!
You can only imagine the pressure to have this crime solved, and solved quickly.
On April 19, 1989, there was a shocking crime in New York City's Central Park. A female jogger was brutally attacked, dragged into the bushes, sexually assaulted, and left to die.
Last night, a woman jogger was found unconscious and partially clothed in Central Park. about 200 feet north of the 102nd Street Cross Drive. What we believe happened is the following. The victim was jogging across the 102nd Street Cross Drive when she was attacked by a dozen young males. She was dragged down the bushes near what is called the lock, where she was beaten and sexually assaulted.
The one Hispanic and 4 black youths arrested in the park were Raymond Santana, Antron McCrae, Kevin Richardson, Yusef Salam, and Corey Wise. All but Yusef Salam gave a videotaped confession. Newspaper headlines proclaimed that the teen gangs were out wilding. The term struck fear into the hearts of New Yorkers. It threatened their security and social instincts. Much of the country became alarmed when the wilding story was carried on all 3 major networks. Here is Tom Brokaw of NBC National News.
Wilding. New York City police say that's new teenage slang for rampaging and wolf packs, attacking people just for the fun of it.
A shocking crime leads to fear in the community, which in turn puts pressure on law enforcement to deliver results. Fear and pressure makes human beings easy prey to a leading cause of wrongful convictions: tunnel vision and its perverse byproduct of noble cause corruption. The shocking crime and the fear that followed, whipped up by a media frenzy, created a tunnel vision that convicted the 5 defendants long before they ever went to trial. Natalie Byfield of the Daily News discusses the prevailing tunnel vision that enveloped New York.
In the first few days after the incident, the narrative that came out was that these young men were guilty, and it was almost unquestioned.
This picture shouts tunnel vision. The lead prosecutor, Elizabeth Lederer, is being escorted to the courthouse. There is a crowd of angry citizens held at bay by a barricade, demanding justice for the jogger. This is evidence that the shocking crime had created fear in the city. The citizens were putting pressure on law enforcement, and everyone believed the 5 teens were guilty. Tunnel vision has what the Canada prosecutors call a perverse byproduct. This byproduct is called noble cause corruption. Police and prosecutors are on a noble cause: capture the killer, lock him up, and make our communities safe. Law enforcement takes on an attitude of the end justifies the means, an attitude of we know he's guilty, let's help the jury conclude the same. Blinded by their tunnel vision, police bend the rules, don't follow established procedures. Prosecutors go all out to get a conviction, forgetting their primary duty is not to convict, but to seek justice. The case against the Central Park 5 began with 4 videotaped confessions. The 5 boys between the ages of 14 and 16 had no attorneys, nor were their parents, many of whom were waiting for their sons in the precinct, allowed to intervene. They were confronted by determined and angry detectives, absolutely sure that the marauding group of teenagers in the park that night had been involved in the jogger assault and rape. Here is Yusef Salam's recollection of that night.
Kevin is saying, this happened. You know, Antron is saying this happened. And they were stopping me during my retelling of the events and saying, is this where you got the woman? Is that where? The tone was very, very scary. I felt like these guys are really angry, and you know what? They might take us to the back of the precinct and kill us.
Within weeks, each defendant recanted their confession. The confessions were the only evidence against the defendants.
The only real evidence the prosecutors have is the evidence the defendants gave them. Hours of graphic videotape confessions.
In episode 3, we talked about how the logic behind the corpus delicti rule can be used to assess the validity of any statement. That being, does the confessor know key details of the crime? Here's what New York Times reporter Jim Dwyer had to say about the confessions.
And if you watch the videotaped confessions, it turns out they actually don't know where the crime took place, they don't know when it took place, and they don't know how it took place. They just know that it happened.
Let's look at another power tool of noble cause corruption: inflammatory media. In 1989, the mayor of New York City was Ed Koch. He joined the almost universal condemnation of the accused teenagers.
When parents or grandmothers of some of these alleged perpetrators, we always have to say alleged because that's the requirement. When those grandmothers say, but he's a good boy, he never did anything, don't you believe it?
Donald Trump joined in the public condemnation of the accused. He talked about how he hated the 5 teens and took out ads in 4 New York dailies calling for a return of the death penalty.
You better believe that I hate the people that took this girl and raped her brutally. You better believe it.
Trump put his money where his mouth is by taking out this full-page ad in 4 New York City newspapers.
When the DNA of a suspect doesn't match the crime scene DNA, law enforcement turns to the power tool of ignoring and/or manipulating the forensic science. In each of these convictions, when the DNA did not match the suspect, the prosecutor came up with an argument that there was another perpetrator who left the semen, but the defendant refuses to identify him. From almost the beginning, the prosecution knew that semen DNA found on the jogger's sock did not match any of the defendants. In the Ken Burns documentary, attorney Michael Warren relates how the information impacted the prosecutor.
Harlan Levy was a DNA prosecutor at the time, and he recalls how Elizabeth Lederer said, "Please come to my office," and he could sense urgency in her voice. And she said, "Look, I feel like I've been kicked in the stomach. There's no DNA match whatsoever to any of these boys."
Professor Saul Kasson explains the prosecutor's new theory of the case.
But the decision was, we can still prosecute this case, and the argument we will make to the jury is just because we didn't get all of them doesn't mean we didn't get some of them. They now created a scenario by which there is a 6th perpetrator, a 6th perpetrator who mysteriously doesn't appear in any of the confessions.
After the April 1989 jogger sexual assault, there was a manhunt for a killer rapist dubbed the East Side Slasher. He had been terrorizing the Upper East Side for months. On August 5th, 1989, 3.5 months after the jogger assault, the man was arrested. He was a 17-year-old by the name of Matias Reyes. During the summer of 1989, he had raped 4 women, killing one, and was interrupted after robbing a fifth. He gave a full confession and was convicted on each of the 5 cases and sentenced to life in prison. In 2001, Reyes met Corey Wise in prison and felt compassion for him. In 2002, Matias Reyes told officials that on the night of April 19, 1989, he had assaulted and raped the Central Park jogger. He had hit her with a tree branch and dragged her into the bushes. He says, "I'm the one who did this."
My certain where I picked up a tree branch and down the road where I dragged the branch. I'm the one that did this.
Reyes said he committed the crime alone. His DNA was a match to the semen left at the crime. Importantly, he knew key details of the crime, facts that even the police did not know. For example, he knew the jogger had been running with a Walkman. It was knocked away at the assault location and not recovered by the police. Also, Reyes knew she had keys with her. He stole them. But when he couldn't find her address to rob her, he threw them away. These facts were confirmed by the jogger. The Manhattan District Attorney, Robert Morgenthau, told reporters, "If we knew then what we know now, we wouldn't have indicted those guys." After a thorough review of the matter, he recommended vacating the convictions of the 5 defendants. In December 2002,
the judge handling the review of the Central Park jogger case has just ruled in the last hour that those convictions against the 5 young men must be set aside. It is a stunning reversal in one of the most controversial crime cases in the city's history.
In 1989, these men were teenagers, 14 to 16 years of age. A substantial part of their lives were stolen from them. Stolen by the very government that should have been educating and protecting them. No amount of money can ever compensate them for the trauma they experienced. This chart reflects cases that followed the progression from shocking crime to fear to pressure to tunnel vision to noble cause corruption and one or more of its power tools: coerced confession, inflammatory media, unreliable witnesses, ignore, manipulate, forensics or science, and official misconduct. The column on the left lists some of the cases where the wrongfully convicted person has been released and or exonerated. There are many more. The column on the right lists a few of the cases where the defendant remains in prison and or convicted. There are many more. This ends episode 12. In episode 13, we'll see how the power tools of noble cause corruption were used to convict Frank Pauline, Albert Ian Schweitzer, and Sean Schweitzer.